Hello, everyone, and welcome to our live webinar today. My name is Joy Realick. I'm the Chief Administrative Officer with Family Source Consultants, and I am joined by Jason Smith from International Fertility Insurance. Today, we're going to be discussing insurance for your surrogate and what you need to know regarding that insurance. We're going to go over a lot of really important details today, and we're kind of going to finish the webinar with a culmination of a timeline of insurances. So without any further ado, I'd like to introduce Jason and let him tell us a little bit about what he does.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Joy, and it's good to virtually meet everyone. I've been doing insurance since 2008. I've been doing surrogacy specific insurance since 2014, so about 10 years now. And I built this company several years back. We have a team of 27, and we help not just Family Source, but roughly about 250 different surrogate agencies, attorneys, and clinics around the globe with insurance to help manage your risks, mostly from a financial aspect, to try to reduce your finances going out by adding some insurance here and there. And we're here to help.
Awesome. Well, I always love having you on these webinars. You are a wealth of knowledge, and we have so much to go through today. So I'm going to, for those of you who have ever watched our webinars before, Jason and I can talk forever. So I'm going to try to keep it really brief and stick to the topics at hand today, and we'll see how well that works for us. First and foremost, why are we holding this webinar? Why do intended parents need to think about insurance for their surrogate or egg donor?
Yeah, so like I said, it's really about risk management, right? So there'll be some things that are contractually required. So what'll typically happen if this is your first time through surrogacy or egg donation is that your side will have an attorney, the surrogate, for example, or the egg donor, their side will have an attorney, and the two parties will come together on a set of agreements that help protect both sides. And there might be things like you need to pay for this, you need to pay for that, and your choices are, some of them will be sort of contractually required that this type of insurance is a must-have. One of them that I can think of is just life insurance, for example. It's just a mandatory. But then there'll be some others that are optional, perhaps, and it's just really a choice of, depending on your finances, you might choose to self-insure that, or you might, rather spend $250, for example, instead of $10,000 potentially. So that's why you have it. It's just with each step throughout the surrogacy and egg donation process, there's some generally small risks that without insurance could wind up being big outflows of money from you.
Yeah, and I think intended parents, when we first are meeting with individuals or couples who are getting used to the idea of surrogacy, or they've just started researching, whenever we mention insurance, the first thing that comes to mind is medical insurance, right? How are we going to pay for the medical bills? But I think as surrogacy and egg donation grows and it becomes more mainstream and popular, there are so many other insurance options out there. And again, it's insurance. You don't want to use it. You don't want to have to have it. But should you need it, it's really great to know not only how to put those in place, but when you need to put those in place. So we're gonna dive in here. For everyone listening, Jason and I kind of got a little skit for you. We're going to go back and forth. We're going to walk you through a typical journey, and Jason's going to interject at certain points when you need to start thinking about types of insurance and purchasing those insurances. So I am an intended parent, and I have signed with Family Source Consultants. I'm thrilled. I am moving forward on my journey for surrogacy or egg donation, and I have done all of the research that my brain can possibly handle. Well, now I am matched with my surrogate. So that's kind of the first stage where we start as an agency interjecting and kind of introducing parents to professionals and other people who are going to help along the way. So Jason, I'm matched with my surrogate. What do I need to be thinking about at this point?
Yeah, so thanks, Joy. It's nice to have you both as a key person there, and now as an intended parent, apparently. When the match comes around, that's typically when Family Source will introduce a set of intended parents or an intended parent to IFI, and we're going to do a free consultation to just explain this vast field of insurance that that, I sometimes I meet people here and there and they say, what do you do? And I say, I can give you 100 guesses. You would never guess what I do. And it's similar here. There's, when you start to approach this, you're just going to be a little bit baffled, maybe a tiny bit overwhelmed by all the different choices. And our goal is just to try to keep it as simple as possible and educate you initially. So we're not necessarily saying you need to buy this or you need to buy that. It's more of an overview at that point, at the match stage. Some of the other things that might make sense there are, we're going to talk about maternity insurance. So this is covering the actual pregnancy, delivery, and postpartum care of the surrogate. So like Joy had said, the medical bills. And there's different ways that we can do this. And one of them is called ACA, or Affordable Care Act. And this is just normal U.S. health insurance that if you're a U.S. citizen, you might buy if you don't have insurance through your employer. So something that you or I might buy. And the issue with this is that there's only a specific time that it's available. When this was created about 10 years ago, they said the good news is everybody gets it. There's no one's excluded. Even if you had cancer, you still get insurance. But to prevent you from just buying it right before your need, we're saying you can only buy it generally in these 2-3 months of the year. And that's called open enrollment. So depending on the timing of the match, we might be starting to talk about that, because if you were matching in October, November, we might want to actually get an ACA plan in place, because it's typically available from November through about January. So if it's not, then if it's the middle of the American summer and it's June, for example, there's really no rush to be talking about that at that point, and we would probably revisit that later in the year. But we'd at least probably give a little bit of an overview of maternity insurance at this point. And then the last thing to talk about is the surrogate's life insurance. There's a couple different routes we can take, and one of them can take sometimes up to maybe a month or two to get in place. So if we were to choose that route, we want to start thinking about that there. But a lot of times people will take a different route, and that can be actually looked at later on in the next stage that we're going to talk about.
Yeah. So I love how you kind of set this up. This is like a research, like an overview. Right now, we're just learning. We're being prepared. At this point, if intended parents have a calendar in front of them, they can start jotting down timelines and dates, really kind of organizing their brain, understanding when these timelines and when these costs are going to occur. Now, you did mention the ACA maternity, but this also could fall into if the surrogate has her own medical coverage, correct?
Correct. Yeah. So so there's really sort of 3 routes that can happen. There's surrogate has her own insurance, and Joy, correct me if I'm wrong here, but Family Source will reach out to IFI and have us do what we call a health insurance review. And sometimes maybe an attorney might do this, or it doesn't necessarily have to be IFI that does it. But generally speaking, we're going to do a health insurance review to evaluate her insurance to see if it has exclusions or liens. A lien is where sort of the insurance company will add in the surrogate's compensation as a way of trying to avoid getting you to use her insurance. But generally speaking, the biggest thing we're looking for is, does her insurance cover or not cover surrogacy? And so if it did, then great, we would probably have some discussion about that in that overview, and say essentially that there's 3 routes that this could go. One is her insurance works, and that's fantastic. But it's, if Family Source were to present to you somebody that wasn't the case, I wouldn't think negatively about that surrogate, because it's probably, I guess I would say it's a bit rare that her insurance will cover, because a lot of the insurance companies obviously would prefer not to cover a pregnancy if they could avoid it. So anyway, her insurance will either cover. If it doesn't cover, then we're looking at either an ACA plan if the timing's right, or what we call the IFI surrogacy maternity plan, which is a private a plan that we've created with the backing of a very strong insurance company behind it. So yeah.
And you are absolutely correct. So within Family Source, we would do a insurance review of any held insurance policies, whether we think they're surrogate friendly or not. We always want that official review so that we can have the peace of mind whether the surrogate's insurance is going to cover or not. And then At that time, we introduce the parents to IFI or another insurance provider if they request, but IFI, and they will tell you all the options that you have. But it's not anything that we're ever going to force someone into. We are just going to let you know what coverages are necessary within this policy, what coverages are necessary within the contracts that you're going to sign, different state rulings, anything that you might need to know about your specific journey. This is the time at Match that you're going to start learning that information and be prepared for as we move forward. So now we are moving forward. We've had our conversation with IFI. We've discussed what's coming ahead of us. We have a general knowledge of what might be needed for our journey. And our surrogate goes to our clinic. She is medically cleared. Hurrah, cannons of confetti. We are very excited. So now we have medical clearance and we're moving on to legal. But this is kind of like the next hurdle, the next stage of where we're at. So Jason, at this time, my surrogate's medically cleared. What do I need to be worried about now?
Yeah, sure. So just to give a kind of a timeline here, and it's not exactly perfect, but you might have a match and then kind of a debatable amount of time between match and medical clearance. It's a matter of lining up the doctor and the timing and so forth. But in between that medical clearance and legal clearance, it might be, for example, 6 weeks or 8 weeks or thereabout. And Joy, correct me if I'm wrong, but assuming that's correct, we're going to start to talk about some things that are now we're starting to get real close to being ready to buy them. So we might, and some of the products that we'll talk about will require what we call underwriting. And underwriting means that we're evaluating the surrogate's medical records from her past pregnancies and her sort of current state of affairs to see, does she fit the qualities, I guess, of a surrogate that the insurance company is willing to insure. And so some of these things are important that we make sure we line up before we actually get pregnant. So some of the things that we would talk about if intended parents were from overseas, meaning not the United States, and yet having a baby in the United States, we would start to talk about what we call newborn insurance. So this is coverage for the baby after the baby's born, or baby or babies after they're born, because typically, one's insurance from their home country does not cover anything in the United States. You might have travel insurance that covers you for emergencies, but it doesn't typically cover, a newborn care, if you will. So we would start to talk about that and ideally line up a choice of a plan that you'd like to do and get that underwriting started. Not necessarily make any payment to us to purchase it, but get the process started, which can take maybe a few weeks all in all. The other thing would be fine tuning and actually doing something about that maternity insurance. So we would have either chosen to do an ACA plan, Affordable Care Act, the normal US health insurance like we talked about, or if the timing isn't right, we would be looking at, again, what I call the IFI surrogacy maternity plan. And this is a plan that's available year round, and you could either use it the entire pregnancy, or you could start on it and then move over to an ACA plan if there's a more favorable choice once open enrollment starts. So we would, again, not necessarily need to buy anything, but more so just get that plan choice selected and get underwriting going so that once we move on to the next stage of legal clearance, that we can actually be ready to actually move forward and bind coverage. And then the last thing would be surrogate disability coverage. So this is coverage, perhaps you're familiar with what disability insurance is. Maybe it's something that you have for yourself, either through work or on your own. This is coverage that covers things like lost wages. But in the surrogacy world, it would cover things like not just lost wages, but childcare and housekeeping that your surrogate might require or request if she were to be on bed rest or hospitalized during the pregnancy due to complications. So we have insurance options for that as well. And again, this is where we'd want to get some quotes going so you understand the costs and ideally put something in place ahead of her actually starting any treatment. So these are the things that I would probably say happen at that medical clearance stage.
Yeah, you mentioned two really important things I wanted to kind of talk about. So the newborn insurance, that is something that you're going to start discussing at medical clearance, but then we are going to revisit that again later on in the journey to make sure it's actually in force and we are ready to go. So it's great that we start the conversations early. But yes, that is something that we will revisit constantly. And of course, when you're in contact with IFI, you have the ability to reach out with them constantly and ask questions and make sure that we're on board. But you also mentioned disability options. And I think that's really important because we've been having a lot of conversations. Well, I have in my consultations with intended parents regarding disability and regarding these insurance policies that are possible for them to purchase. Now, when you are in a legal contract, a legal surrogacy contract, you are going to be responsible for those lost wages for a surrogate. Should she be on bed rest? Should she be hospitalized? You can't get around that. You know, that is an inconvenience that happened to her. That is a reasonable cost for the surrogacy journey that she is going to be out of pay because she is not able to go into work. Now, you can opt to pay those outright. You can hope that you have a smooth journey and that she never goes on bed rest and she's working all the way until 8 months, 3 weeks, and 2 days. But you also would have to pay, and those expenses can add up. Surrogacy lost wages can be anywhere from 2 to 8 weeks. I mean, there's a lot of factors that go into it. So you also can kind of take that insurance, and it's always weird to say insurance because it's an assurance that you have coverage should that happen. And I really think that it's important that intended parents look at that, calculate the risks of what their surrogates' lost wages are, think about the worst case scenario and prepare for it so then you can enjoy the best case scenario and not have to worry. Okay, so let's move on. We are medically cleared. We have had the new discussion with IFI, or we are in contact with our case coordinator at Family Source, and they are walking us through the process and making sure that we are assigned all the correct policies and we are enrolled wherever we need to be. But now we have legal clearance. This is kind of the last little hurdle before transfer. Contracts are signed, everyone's on the same page, expectations are set forth, and we are just waiting for the embryo transfer. So now what at this time do we need to be enrolling in?
All right, so now it's the real deal. Now we really have, you know, we had a match, but now we have a match that is medically cleared and legally cleared, and so now it's time to really get serious. And now we're going to put in place some of those policies that we're actually going to go a little bit further with some of the policies that we talked about. I wanted to say something real quick. I meant to say it earlier, and now I realized it as we were talking about this. You know, we're doing a video recording here, and I'm not sure, but I presume that this might be available to, maybe it's just live, but maybe it might be something that you can see months down the road. And so some of these things could change. I just want to point that out. Newborn insurance, particularly, it can evolve. Different options have been available through the years, and some of them you need to get sooner than later. But that's why it's so important to have that early discussion at the match. So usually at that point, we're way ahead of the game, and we can start to say, oh, you know what? Now there's actually something we need to talk about now that maybe wasn't part of this video. But anyway, at legal clearance, we're going to actually make sure that now we're real close to the surrogate or egg donor starting medication and then going on to a retrieval or a transfer, so forth. So with this, now we're going to actually set in place the life insurance of some sort. If we didn't do the kind that I mentioned earlier that needs more time, we're going to put in place the one that's more instantaneously available. And there's some different additions that can be added to that. Like sometimes you'll see in your contract loss of reproductive organs. These are types of things that there are some additional coverages that are all part of that policy. Surrogate or donor IVF complications insurance. So whether we're talking about the donor before egg donation or we're talking about the surrogate before the transfer, there's some medication that she takes that she could have an allergic reaction to, and rarely there could be some situations where she could be hospitalized. And we want to have some coverage in place for either one of these situations, whether it's the donor or the surrogate. So we want to have that in place before she starts the medication, and we're right around the corner from that if we're sitting at legal clearance. And then local monitoring is another thing that if by chance your surrogate or your donor is from one area but headed to another area for treatment, sometimes there'll be a need for setting up support to help with finding a clinic in a different area and or managing that process. And we would start to set that up at that point too, if needed.
Yeah. And if you are working with a reputable agency or a reputable insurance company or a reputable clinic, they're going to ensure that all of these policies are in place before they allow the transfer to start. That is to protect the surrogate, that is to protect the parents, that is to protect the finances of all involved. It's just a best practice. We need these in place. At least the minimums that are outlined in the contract have to be in place before a retrieval, before a transfer, and most of the time before a medication protocol even starts. So that's why we start these conversations so early in the process. It's because we don't want you to end up in the realm of all the conversations and decisions and things that need to happen at the end of legal clearance and right before the big day of retrieval or transfer. You don't want to be worrying about it then. There are a lot of conversations that need to happen. I understand intended parents have a lot coming at them from the clinic, from the attorneys, from the agency, maybe even from the surrogate if there's communication early. It's a lot. And so it's really important. And at Family Source, your case coordinator will provide this kind of support to you, that we kind of break it down into more digestible chunks. We're going to think about it early. We're going to attack it at each step. And we're really going to make sure that we're crossing each bridge as it happens instead of waiting to the very end and then trying to get everything in culmination. So please, if you're an intended parent thinking about surrogacy and you have questions, reach out, ask those questions. Don't be afraid to ask the question again and push and make sure nothing's changed or you're on board. Maybe jot yourself a calendar and when you need to start thinking about things. But really lean on the professionals that you have at your disposal, whether that's your insurance, your attorney, your agency. We're here to help. And we eat, breathe, live this all the time. Jason, more so than even myself. This is what we do. So if you have questions or you're feeling uncertain in any stage, whether that's medical clearance, legal clearance, match, we're here. Ask those questions when you are feeling them, because we'd rather you be informed and ready than scrambling and we have to delay a transfer or retrieval. So great information, Jason. I always love having you on these webinars. I feel like you are correct. We are going to save this and have this available for all of the intended parents to watch. And if they have any questions, they are more than welcome to reach out to you at IFI, correct?
Yeah. I was going to say, there's we did a really big overhaul of our website last year, and there's a wealth of information there. And whenever I do a video, I'm always wanting to make sure I say all of this could change. So, make sure that you're asking for the most recent information, either from myself or from Family Source. It's really important. And Joyce said this, but we do see people that try to do this independently, and it can be really, really messy. And Joy was talking about how it's so important to get these things in place at the right stages. Sometimes we get requests, months later than it should have been, and it's not possible to actually get the insurance at that point. So that's why Family Source is really great about introducing us super early.
Yeah. Well, and Jason said it, you can always reach out to Family Source Consultants via our website or at info@familysourceconsultants.com. We've been more than happy to get any information to you or make the introductions if you'd like to speak with IFI directly. Thank you again, Jason. I hope you have a wonderful day, and I'm looking forward to our next webinar.
All right. See you soon. Thanks so much for having me.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.